speaking in Norfolk. Joining us now, Scott Taylor, former member of the House of Representatives, now a United States candidate for Senate. He's running in a Republican primary to be the nominee. That'll be decided in June of 2020. And then if he's a nominee, he gets to take on Mark Warner, which will be a tough task. But I think he can win, and he's with us now. Scott, great to have you.
John, great to be with you. I know you want to talk about Hong Kong, but I was just listening to you a little earlier, and it just drives me crazy. I mean, I think whether you're pro-choice or pro-life, it doesn't matter. I think everybody in this society should be able to agree not to kill a baby when it gets on the table, or right before then, because the reality is no matter what the words are that they dress it up with, reproductive health or, what women's health, the reality is at that point to take that baby out, you got to go in there and do medieval things to it where it feels pain, where you're putting in this I forgot the name of the instrument they use to be able to crush the skull and dismember it to be able to bring the baby out. It's just disgusting. I mean, I don't understand how any Virginian could find that acceptable in our state or anywhere, quite frankly.
It's a bridge too far, Scott, for a lot of people. And see what the Democrats want to do, like Sam Rasool, and you and I know Sam. He's a really good guy. But
he is a nice guy.
Yeah, what they want to do is they just want to get away from this so fast. He said the timing was bad. No, it's just a bad bill. And they don't want to really talk about any of the ramifications. And look,
bad for babies. I mean, it's medieval, man. I mean, what they have to do to essentially kill that baby, that is not reproductive health care.
No, it's gross. It's disgusting. And what kind of a society are we that is going to allow that to happen? And that we just sit back and say, okay, that's fine. Let's allow that to happen. It's just gross. So for many of us, you can't stomach it. But that's, that's one of their big issues. They're going to have to defend that at the state level going into the fall. Okay, Scott, lots on the major scene here. I don't know where to start. Let's start with Hong Kong. China blinking. You're running for U.S. Senate. Carrie Lam, the chief executive of Hong Kong, withdrawing the extradition bill. Never in my lifetime did I think I would see the Chicoms blinking on something and stepping back. I fully expected to see the tanks. What happened here?
Well, China's they're having they're fighting a multi-front battle if you think about it. I mean, the trade war it's contributed to the slowest growth that they've had in 27 years. They got a negative demographic trend and labor shortage, and now they have these Hong Kong protests, which I think people are failing to realize how pivotal and historic that these protests could be. And quite frankly, whatever China does, I mean, they're getting forced into having to take a direction that's going to have long-lasting effects. Let's talk about how this actually started and the butterfly effect that actually created it. Now, there was a murder in Taiwan, and this guy killed his pregnant girlfriend and tried to escape back to Hong Kong. So they had to create this law to be able to extradite him out of there. But the reality is, people they were already protesting in Hong Kong in 2014 for universal suffrage for voting, because they saw that the people who were put in charge, of course, have they're backed by Beijing. Well, that's a big problem. So these folks in Hong Kong, and one of the lasting legacies of the Brits being there, they've tasted freedom and a liberal law and order society. Although they understand that that they don't have universal suffrage right now because China's controlling that. But these protests, they had protests in 2014 for universal suffrage, and China did blink, and China did say, hey, basically let's have dialogue. So they set up this dialogue thing, but people started getting arrested. They were jailed. That nothing happened. So I think 4 out of the 5 leaders of the protest movement were jailed. So I think that Carrie Lam, they put this bill. She blinked when they had millions of protesters this time and said, okay, it's dead, but she didn't withdraw it. So now what you just mentioned today, I think it was, that she just withdrew this bill. But I think it's too late. I think that you're going to see these protests that are going to continue, because they're going to be it's reached this tipping point. They're going to want that universal suffrage, which could also spill over into places like Macau and Tibet, who are going to want the same thing. So, I mean, China's in a big pickle here, because they have a multi-front problem, and obviously the president's trade war is contributing to that, and you're witnessing a pretty historical moment right now.
Right, because the president has said that Chinese manufacturing is getting devastated. Well, of course it is, because
It is.
again, Scott, I have to say this every single day till it sinks in, because the legacy lying fake news media will not say this. The purpose of Trump's tariffs is not to get revenue in, and it's not to have a trade war. The objective, the end game, is to get our supply chain back in the United States, get the manufacturing back, get the means of production here instead of there. That's his objective at the end of the day. Now, he can say it's to level the playing field, but his goal is to bring manufacturing back, the supply chain back, and get the jobs back. Well, if they come back here, where did they come from? There. Well, that's where their manufacturing base is getting hammered. And so they're feeling it on all fronts. And it appears to me that in Hong Kong, this was a battle, a tank battle, they just didn't want to have right now. And but you nailed it, because had they done this 2 months ago, that would have probably been it. But you're right. Now the protesters are like, look, that's already been decided. That's only a tip of the iceberg. Now we want all this other stuff, right?
There's no question. I mean, that's where the energy is going. And look, when the folks that are in Hong Kong, they're seeing how they've tried to implement some liberal market reforms that have helped the rise, but in the end, they're still a communist government. I mean, they just rolling out an Orwellian social credit system where they have like surveillance on their citizens' behavior, online, offline. It's getting monitored. They're going to score them, and sometimes if you have a bad score, it can stop you from getting a job or purchasing train tickets or even getting on an airplane. I mean, this again, this is a society in Hong Kong who's tasted Western values, and they certainly don't want that. And I think that contagion could potentially spread. So it's interesting to see how China will handle that. But you talked about the president, and we've had this discussion before. Look, I'm for it. This is I think the third or fourth president who said, "Hey, China is stealing IP. They're cheating on trade. They're manipulating their currency." And that has negative effects to this country. This is just the first president that stood up. And whether you agree or disagree with him stylistically or how he's going about it, I think it was necessary to do. And I'm glad that he's standing up for the American people.
Well, finally, someone is, after all this time we've gone through, basically 5 or 6 presidents, 5 decades, 6 presidents, 5 decades without anybody standing up to the Chinese. And now you see what happens. You stand up to them, and they blinked in Hong Kong. Let's get to Afghanistan. Scott, there seems to be a deal, Scott Taylor, with the Taliban. That's what we've heard. There seems to be a deal where they're going to be part of an Afghan government that is going to allow us to draw troops down and to finally get out of there in some orderly fashion. Do you believe it?
Well, I know for a fact that there's negotiations in a deal. I know Ambassador Khalilzad personally, he's a friend, and he sends me messages. I know that they're negotiating. I don't know exactly what the deal looks like. Obviously, I'd like to see that. You want to make sure that when you talk about the Taliban being part of governing thing, you have to understand that in Afghanistan, the Taliban they're part of the fabric of that society. They govern in some areas. Now we may or may not like that, of course, but the reality is they're part of that society, and you can't kill every one of them, obviously. So the issue for me is it a deal that makes sense for the military to be able to withdraw if they do withdraw on our timeline when we want to, that makes sense for the Taliban folks as well. I haven't seen it yet. I get messages from them, but I haven't seen the actual deal. I'm very interested to see it, and it's hard for me to say I support it or not support it without understanding what it is. But there's no question about it that this administration has sought to end our longest war in our history. And look, I've buried more friends than I would wish upon anybody. Listen, Amazing Grace played on the bagpipes at funerals more than I want anybody to have from Afghanistan. So it's very emotional and close to me, this war. But the reality is we do need to find a responsible end to it.
I read the excerpts of General Mattis's book, which I didn't read all of it. I did in the New York Times, though, on Sunday read. They ran a lot of the excerpts of it, which I thought were very interesting because he really blasted Obama Biden in their withdrawal from Iraq and saying that it basically caused the vacuum that invented ISIS. And so I'm for withdrawing from Afghanistan. But after reading Mattis, you know, as any intelligent person, you try to understand both sides. And it did give me
Sure.
pause. I mean, it did give me pause because a lot of the things that Mattis was saying in there seemed to be right. And that is exactly what he predicted happened would happen. So it seems like based on that experience, maybe we should be sure that whatever steps we take in Afghanistan that are they're not rationed or thought through, right?
There's no question that any withdrawal creates a vacuum, and vacuums in nature are filled, just like
Right.
with Iraq. And so, does the deal give us the ability to make sure that our interests are protected? Does the deal give us the ability to make sure that there isn't a growing terrorist organization that can attack the United States and our interests? I mean, I think those are important points to see what comes out of that. And that Mattis isn't wrong when he said that. I mean, there's no question that there was a vacuum that was created in Iraq, and it was filled, and it was filled by some very ugly people.
Yeah, no question about it. You're on the John Fredericks Radio Show. We're with Scott Taylor. Scott is a former congressman, 2nd District, Southeast Virginia Republican. He's running for U.S. Senate 2020 to take on Mark Warner. Scott, I've only got a couple more minutes, but I want to get to another issue, which is Brexit. In the UK right now, Boris Johnson's government collapsing around him. He's just called for new elections in a month, October 14th, I believe, which is going to end up being the son of Brexit. And so Johnson wants to get out of there no matter what. He pledged to do that, and he says, with or without a deal, I'm getting out. A couple of his members have gone to the other side and say they will not allow Britain getting out without a Brexit deal, that it could have ramifications on the global economy. What say you, Scott Taylor?
Well, I think it's either way, it's going to have ramifications on the global economy and geopolitical environment. There's no question either way. But the reality is, they had a referendum, and the folks in the UK, they voted for it. They voted for Brexit. So I'm not privy to all the intimate details and all the parliamentary politics that are going on, and whose interests lie where, whose political constituencies lie where. All I know is the UK voted for it. They voted to Brexit. So, in my opinion, Boris Johnson is doing what he's supposed to do, which is Brexit.
Scott Taylor, final question. If you're in the U.S. Senate, you read the IG report on James Comey, and we've got other reports coming out on McCabe and others that were involved in the Russian collusion fiasco, the FISA warrants. Was the fine print in there? There's a lot of other things that are going to be talked about. When you read the Comey report by the IG, what was your reaction to that, Scott?
I think he's an embarrassment. I mean, look, I have friends that I served with in the military who are now in the FBI, and they liked Comey before. They looked up to him and had respect for him. And then when all this came out, that evaporated very quickly. When I spoke to them, and yeah, I mean, I think he's an self-righteous embarrassment to the FBI, and he let his own personal politics take priority over his job and what he was supposed to do. And I think I don't have any love lost whatsoever for Comey. I mean, I think he's embarrassed the FBI and tainted the reputation of a great institution with some really good people in it. We've talked about this a lot. I think that this fake Russia propaganda, which my opponent Mark Warner, of course, put on Virginians in America, I think it's gonna be a black mark in history for our nation.
Final question, Scott Taylor, running for U.S. Senate. I asked the same question to Corey Lewandowski, who I believe is going to announce his campaign in the next 10 days in New Hampshire for Senate. I'm going to ask it of you as well. The president has really jawboned to Mitch McConnell, current leader, in getting rid of the 60-vote cloture rule, just getting rid of it and let the chips fall where they may, regardless of who's in control of what. The president believes that is an obstacle to getting progress done. McConnell believes that it's a stopgap if the opposing party takes over. They need 60 votes to get anything done. If you're in the U.S. Senate, would you vote with the Lewandowski faction if he's there to get rid of this 60 vote cloture rule, or stay with it?
Look, I'm somewhere in between. I mean, I understand minority rights in the Senate. I understand Mitch McConnell's position, but I also understand how that the using of that rule has impeded this administration, the president's ability to govern, and put ambassadors in different places around the world, which is necessary for our country. So, right now, I'd lean towards Corey and say get rid of it so that we can get stuff done. That's where I'm at right now.
Scott Taylor, we're out of time. I want to thank you for being with us. Scott, people want more information on your campaign for U.S. Senate in Virginia. Where do they go?
TaylorForSenate.com. TaylorForSenate.com. You can go there. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Instagram. I'm everywhere. We love to have your support, of course, in retiring Mark Warner. Thanks, John. I really appreciate you having me.
TaylorForSenate.com. Scott is going to be the nominee, and I really believe this is going to be, in 2020, a razor-thin race. If there's anybody who can beat Mark Warner, it's Scott Taylor, in my judgment. John Fredericks Radio Network. Stay with us. We'll be right back.